Ideology. There is a dominant ideology that is considered inherently good, and its opposite is inherently bad. And if you find yourself being accused of not being committed to this ideology, or that you're insufficiently committed to it, you will be on the defensive, and your chances of being featured in the media prominently go way down. But what is that ideology? Well, it changes and morphs a little bit with time. In the 80s, when Manufacturing Consent was published, Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman considered the dominant ideology to be anti-communism.
What? Communist? No!
I mean, it's still totally unviable politically in the United States to identify as a communist, and try to think back to the last time someone on CNN seriously referenced Marx. But the difference between today and the 20th century is that now the charge of communism is just right-wing paranoia about anyone advocating for social programs.
We're not going to throw out capitalism. We tried that. Other countries tried that. It was called communism, and it just didn't work.
So let me...
Now think, Bloomberg was only booed because it's not nice to call someone a communist. But it's still taken for granted that communism is bad. But even though it's patently ridiculous, the idea that there's any serious number of communists in the mainstream press or in Congress, the right wing is always ready to roll it out.
Think Barack Obama is a communist?
She's a communist, which is why everybody hates her.
Will Democrats unite against the communist threat?
In 2012, Congressman from Florida, Alan West, made it into a news cycle because he said,
I believe there's about 78 to 81 members of the Democrat Party that are members of the Communist Party.
The precisions.
Now, obviously that's insane because like half the Progressive Caucus are millionaires who are funded by the banks. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is a communist to the same degree that pizza is a vegetable. But Chris Matthews is just as afraid of communists as Alan West.
We were so trying hard to be really good Americans. We rooted for Bishop Sheen. We looked at Joe McCarthy. We thought he went too far, but we liked sort of what his point of view was, anti-communist. We were very anti-communist.
Joe McCarthy liked his point of view, but went too far. This is liberal media. But anyway, anti-communism no longer functions as the dominant ideology. An even more powerful one has taken its place, and it's an ideology organized around
The free market.
Free enterprise.
An open marketplace and an open democracy.
Neoliberalism might be a more appropriate term. Now, it's not as black and white as pro or anti-communism. You'll find exceptions for sure, but neoliberalism dominates. So, a quick definition. Neoliberalism is essentially free market ideology. The idea being that the free market will engender competition and innovation, and ultimately this will be to everyone's benefit. And of course, if we want truly free markets, that means we need to deregulate and let the magic of free enterprise work. But it's not just freedom of the market, it's individual freedom, because neoliberalism is in first instance a theory of political economic practices that proposes that human well-being can best be advanced by liberating individual entrepreneurial freedoms and skills. So your next question might be, am I really supposed to see all that every time I turn on the news? And the answer is yeah, pretty much. Let's take deregulation, privatization, free market stuff all together. Okay, so obviously conservatives, conservative media, love this stuff. But liberal media, MSNBC, CNN, terms like deregulation, privatization, the free market, that's Reaganomics, that's trickle down. Democrats don't fall for that shit. Unless they do.
Elizabeth Warren is taking aim at T-Mobile and Sprint. A multi-billion-dollar merger between the two would hurt competition, slash jobs, and reduce wages. Let's deal with Elizabeth Warren's comments. I mean, you've answered them a million times, but she still comes forward and says this.
People who have questioned the merger, the things that they're questioning, they want more competition, they want lower prices, they want more innovation in this industry.
So first off, even Elizabeth Warren's tweet protesting this giant merger is an example of neoliberalism because it assumes the market and competition, as she points out, are intrinsically positive. If only competition can be guided, it will always be to everyone's benefit. And if we inhibit competition, this will be everyone's loss. There's no actual reason to think this. Not to diminish Warren's efforts, but to illustrate how baked in free market ideology is. Now, you saw a clip from CNN. Not much protesting from Fox News, but MSNBC did have this to say.
one key hurdle to getting the T-Mobile Sprint deal done is approval from the Trump administration. T-Mobile announced its mega merger with rival Sprint last April. 9 executives with the telecom giant booked rooms in, guess where? The Trump International Hotel in D.C.
Trump approved a $26 billion merger so that some T-Mobile executives would stay at his hotel. I mean, maybe it's conjecture. It's not good if it's true. But I think the focus could have been on why this giant merger is problematic for the country, the consumer, as opposed to the problematic ways in which the deal came together. Same thing in 2018. AT&T was going to merge with Time Warner.
A mega merger in the media industry that certainly got some criticism from Donald Trump earlier in the campaign. He didn't want that much concentration of ownership and power.
Trump's against it. Does that mean that the Democrats are for it?
This is a vertical merger, meaning there is no present competition between these two companies. Really, it would enhance them both. They'd have a wider offering.
It's as simple as that. They are never going to be against corporations careening toward monopoly power, and if they have a micron of criticism, it will be contingent upon the parameters of the president's involvement and approval. And of course, Fox News wasn't going to really take a hard stance on this. They can't betray Trump, but they also don't want to be seen endorsing serious government oversight of big business. So most of their coverage was kind of dispassionate, didn't really frame it as anything terribly urgent one way or the other. Now, what about privatization? It definitely isn't a positive word in liberal circles like it is on the right. Things like,
we know that a Trump administration has tried to privatize the post office. So this is another way of trying to, degrade the service that the American people deserve.
But mainstream news in general, as we've seen, is bifurcated by political party to the point that issues of privatization are less likely to be covered on liberal outlets if Democrats are participating in them. And certainly, a Democrat's role in them will usually be glossed over. So, for example, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos is rightfully panned as someone who wants to ruin public schools and make all schooling private. Yes, but there are pro-charter school Democrats as well. Democrats who are propped up by liberal outlets, and they will end up aiding Republicans in their privatization efforts. So it's a disservice to everyone not to highlight this fact. The real issue, though, is that while it may or may not be taboo to talk about privatizing things, the concept of privatization is just fine for the most part. And it's almost always taboo to talk about the reverse, socializing things.
Medicare for All is not that popular among the general electorate once they know it gets rid of private insurers.
Medicare for All, which would wind up abolishing private insurance, is crazy.
And if you search the New York Times for Medicare for All, you will get the dangers of Medicare for All, the impossible dream, and the Medicare for All trap. Corporate benevolence. A component of manufacturing consent to neoliberalism is selling the idea that corporations are responsive and desirous of social betterment.
Target, Estee Lauder, these are companies that are doing the right thing. And
businesses, you mentioned Apple, they're coming up, stepping up to the plate.
The business community is now stepping up to the plate.
Businesses that have stepped up to the plate.
It would be impossible to have CEOs or business people on as guests or speak positively about the privatization of healthcare if you, as a viewer, thought that every corporation and CEO is only looking to accumulate capital and all the good they do are cynical PR campaigns. So it's important to remind people that it wasn't a mistake to let these companies amass the wealth and power they have. So when a company does something, say, socially progressive, sometimes there's an inclination to highlight that.
The American football team, the Washington Redskins, is finally retiring its controversial name and logo.
6 money management firms drafted a letter calling on FedEx, Nike, and Pepsi to take a public stand against the team's name. They asked other investment managers to sign on as well. Within a week, they had more than 85 firms representing more than $600 billion in assets.
FedEx, PepsiCo, Bank of America, Nike, when all of them basically told Dan Snyder, enough is enough.
Never mind the sins of Pepsi, Nike, and Bank of America and how their own businesses might disproportionately affect one race or another, they bullied the Redskins into changing their name. Good. But I am reminded of a term coined by Nancy Fraser, progressive neoliberalism. Progressive neoliberalism uses diversity with its positive connotations as a strategic marketing tool for creating vacuous images of the corporate cool, the icons of a new cosmopolitan age in which broader societal economic inequality and cultural imperialism continue to rise. While such a self-image of diversity is used as a self-legitimizing strategy in terms of its public face and internal rationalizations, the liberal media watchdogs have left militarism and imperial expansion unchecked while uncritically supporting so-called free trade agreements that grant even more power to economic globalist elites. It leaves militarism unchecked. So, the 2021 military budget had something in it mandating the removal of Confederate names from military bases. This was mentioned dozens of times. Huge win, right? Progress. Yes. There was also a vote on an amendment that would have cut the Pentagon budget by a minor 10%. Half the Democrats joined Republicans in voting against this budget cut. I found no mentions of this fact, or the fact that Democrats who joined Republicans happened to receive 3.4 times as much money from the defense industry as the people who voted for the 10% cut. And then there are the guests. This is part of Filter 3, sources, link in description, but it reinforces the dominant ideology. CEOs and business owners are one of the most overrepresented groups in news media. And when you hear from these people, you are hearing the point of view of someone who owns property, sets wages, and usually endeavors to keep wages lower so as to keep their profit share higher. The people who would benefit from keeping minimum wage low. Now, to be fair, on liberal outlets, you will hear people advocating for a higher minimum wage. But across the media, you also hear a lot of people trying to sow doubt.
Federal minimum wage is too low, but you don't take it from where the federal minimum wage is up to almost $20 an hour.
24 states are raising their minimum wage. Small businesses, will they be able to keep up?
Evidence of pros and cons to hiking wages.
But the thing is, everyone knows being a minimum wage employee sucks, which is why being an entrepreneur is so cool. Shows like The Profit and Shark Tank fetishize entrepreneurship, but the lauding and celebration of entrepreneurship as a method of economic mobility is ubiquitous.
We need a dedicated agenda to close the wealth gap, expand affordable housing, invest in brown and black and AAPI, Native American entrepreneurs.
A Main Street entrepreneur building a business from scratch into a national company, you've got to be accountable.
The media show us that the ultimate expression of your freedom is to become an employer, and the greatest tonic for an economy is to grant everybody the ability to engage in free enterprise. This is part of a philosophy of personal responsibility. Shows that bring us finance gurus who show us how to handle our money, save, or help us accept the fact that our financial security is for each of us to personally cultivate. And if you haven't done so, it might be because you were irresponsible somehow.
Planning for the future has become a lot more challenging, and really the onus is now on the individual more than ever.
If you don't have enough money, decrease your expenses, and then your money will go further.
As if poor people are only poor because they hadn't thought to open a savings account. The notion that anyone needs to be taught how to handle money grants autonomy to a population that never had enough money to be autonomous. Daytime talk shows do this the best. They coach us in every facet of life. Countless segments dedicated to solving some insufficient feature of your existence. Your weight, your diet, your kid's screen time, your retirement. All things that have as much to do with the lobbying habits of the show's advertisers and parent company as it does with your actual personal experience of those things. Or the personal responsibility of voting. The incessant analysis of the political horse race boils civic engagement down to voting every 2 or 4 years. Protests are something you might watch on TV and decide whether or not to approve, but organizing is not something you yourself participate in. And if America's own faulty electoral college system occasionally elects the loser to the White House, better just blame the million or so Green Party voters for choosing incorrectly. And because personal responsibility and individualism are so highly valued, we have to discourage things like welfare and entitlements that might make people lazy and shirk their personal responsibilities.
Right now, if you're collecting unemployment, you could be getting 100% of wages or 100% plus of wages. And remember, you may have kids at home. So as the governor said, if you're not willing to go back in the workforce, the governor may cut off some of those benefits to change that equation of what the opportunity cost to stay home is versus the opportunity cost to re-enter the workforce.
So, when all this comes in terms of the spending here.
That clip, of course, comes in the wake of coronavirus. Another wonderful example of the neoliberal consensus. Cable news spends infinitely more time obsessing over which individual states have better plans for reopening their economies, which took it seriously, which didn't, than they spend exposing the political and economic failures that will leave thousands of people in every state destitute. And so that's the dominant ideology, neoliberalism, and how the media conforms to it. But I'll reiterate that this is obviously not black and white. Ideas that fall outside of the neoliberal consensus do appear, it's just not to a meaningful or competitive degree. So that's Filter 5. I have a lot more of the book to get through, so this will be an ongoing project. The 5 filters of the book are actually only the first chapter of manufacturing consent. There are other principles I want to get to, but thanks for watching thus far. Please like and subscribe. It will help other people find this, and I'll see you in the next one.